living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
How are you doing? How really are you? That's a question that a lot of us will just, bypass. Oh, I'm fine. But what if you're not fine? Is it okay to not be okay? The whole mental health field has gotten an increased level of awareness recently for very good reason. Mental illness has always been an issue, but over the last, especially year and a half with the COVID-19 pandemic, all of us have experienced increased tension and pressure and stress, and our level of mental well-being has been challenged, some more than others. Well, my guest today, Brett Ullman, knows what that's like since long before the COVID-19 pandemic. This is not only a problem out there, it's also a problem in the church. We've been talking about this area of mental health recently on Relationship Prescriptions for good reason, because it is a big deal. Brett Ullman is someone who has experienced mental illness and continues to walk the journey toward wellness. One of the things I think you will find fascinating in this conversation is how you can be experiencing mental illness and mental health at the same time. I was intrigued by that idea, and I believe you will be too. So take the time to listen, and partway through this conversation, I ask Brett that specific question. How can you have a mental illness and experience mental wellness, mental health at the same time? You will want to hear that answer. Very, very insightful. Brett is an author, a speaker, a curator. Obviously, he hasn't been able to travel quite the same since COVID, and you'll hear him talk a bit about that. But fascinating perspectives on several areas of life: parenting, men, sexuality, and mental health. So without waiting any longer, my conversation with Brett Ullman. Brett Ullman, it is a real pleasure to have you with us on the program today. Just starting out, a big thank you. This is an important topic, and thank you for addressing it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Always a good day talking about mental health, I find.
Oh, yes. And mental health, that is a big deal. It's always been a big deal, but it's even a bigger deal now with everything that's gone on. And we'll comment on that going forward. But for the people who may not be aware of your story, you were a follower of Jesus. And a few years ago, you faced some really hard mental health issues that just kind of hit you like a Mack truck from the way I hear your story. Just tell us about that and where you came from with all of this.
Sure. And for people who don't know me, I live about east of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, about 45 minutes. I'm married with 2 kids. I have a 19-year-old in second year university college, and then first year a son will be heading into this year. I was a teacher. I taught for a decade. And then I left teaching. I did a program called the Aero Leadership Program out in British Columbia, and for the Americans, north of Seattle. And then I did a master's degree in leadership, which I think you have a leadership degree as well. Am I right with that?
My focus in my doctoral program was Christian leadership. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I did a master's in leadership and evangelism down at Wheaton Grad School in Chicago.
Okay.
And then my life changed.
Yeah.
I left teaching to be a speaker, and I've been a speaker/author for about 15 years. And like a normal speaker, 125 dates a year is pretty normal. But suddenly I'm flying to Chicago. I'm an international student, even though it's a 50-minute flight, like 50 flight. I'm an international student, so became expensive. And so my speaking dates went to about 275 to 300 a year.
Yeah, crazy.
Fully unsustainable. And, we hear the term intervention. My board, my family, my friends all had interventions telling me to slow down. And I just said, March 1st, 2012. Because if I could make it to March 1st, 2012, I graduate and I could rebalance my life. And I made it. And over the next 5 months, I began to be dizzy. Like you can't tell from this. I'm actually 6'6". And so I'd be walking across the front of a church, like the bottom of the stage. And I just start to feel dizzy. Suddenly I didn't know what to do. Like panic attacks began to happen.
Wow.
And 5 months in, I basically collapsed in a parking lot. My equilibrium just went. My wife walked me kind of like a blind person by the arm to a car, and I didn't leave the cottage for the week, my house for 5 months, and I didn't work for a year. And we're now well into 2021, and this is still my journey. And so it's been interesting as someone who is a Christian, but a Christian who speaks on mental health.
Yes.
And this is still my journey to today. And it's actually shaped and reshaped my views and feelings of how we as faith-based people, especially in leadership, need to address mental health, because I've kind of come through the other side of it. And so I'm looking forward to our conversations today.
Yeah, thanks, Brett, just for being so real, first of all. When you couldn't leave your house for 5 months and couldn't work for a year, what was that process like? And mostly, moving forward, I want to just, start by acknowledging that, yeah, these are huge issues, but you didn't stay in that state. And yet you say you're still wrestling with that today. What was the process forward like? And maybe just talking about that can help people understand this isn't you take one pill and it's fixed, or you go in the hospital for a week and it's fixed, or you have one prayer and it's fixed. It's a process.
Yeah. And even the process, we're not like, we live in the now and the not yet, right?
Yes.
We're not guaranteed the process ends in this side of heaven. And so it's not just like, I think it was Larry Crabb, who passed away this year, if I'm correct. Larry once said, we think A plus B equals C. We're Christians, and especially for those of us in leadership, we're Christians, we're doing good work. Therefore, we don't think we'll have these things. And it was Stephen Grekvich in the book, Mental Health in the Church, where he said, it's one of those incredible misunderstandings that God spares this kind of pain and suffering from those with deep and abiding faith.
Oh, yes.
And so, I've never gotten better. I've had ups and downs. I've had seasons. And then through assessment and things, I've been diagnosed with different things. I got diagnosed with Lyme disease a few years ago, which is, is that the root issue? Or is that, as my doctor said, are you just really unlucky and you have two different things going on in life? But I think I'm learning strategies and how to cope. Like if I was physically at an environment where we were together today and speaking, I always sit in a chair. Someone once called me the sitting speaker. I'm like, It's weird, but it's true. Because for me, if I sit in those old wingback chairs, if I feel dizzy when I'm speaking and I feel it here and in here, I just lean back. And so here I can't put my head back, but I would just lean back. And so I'm learning how to function. But then there's these ups and downs. And so it's continuing assessments and continuing doctors and people who are looking at my journey. But it's hard. And there's many people who are these complex cases. And it's funny. Some people are simple. You go to a sleep clinic and you have sleep apnea. Yeah. And then there's those of us like me and others, and it's very complex. And it's trying to understand the why, the what. But during that, how do I be a father? How do I be a husband? Yeah. How do I keep working? And it's been an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah. If you would talk about some of the things that have helped, and again, I with you will be clear, we are not talking about these things being a cure, but you talk about being more functional. What are some of those things that you do incorporate in your life that help you be more in this world as long as we're in the already?
What's hard for me is, and this has been one of my most frustrating things in my journey, is there's never been a correlation of, if I do this, I feel better. Okay. And it's been really hard. So I went through a season where I was on medications for mental health, and it's okay to not be okay. Yes. And I think it was Perry Noble who once said, but it's not okay to stay that way. Now, it's also easy to say that. Some of us do stay that way. But I've been on meds, and, if you need to be on meds, that's okay. And for me, I found that they weren't helpful. They actually were more harmful. But the same meds that I took that were harmful to me were life-saving to friends of mine. So there's this tension in all of these things. And there's so much nuance. Daily exercise has just been part of my life. But in the last few months, for whatever reason, my ears are very full and I feel very dizzy. And so rather than walking, 3 miles, 5 kilometers, whatever a day. I'm now doing short walks. I go do 20-minute walks. Mindfulness, which is such an interesting word in the church, because someone once yelled at me at a talk, nothing like having someone scream out at you, but they said, "Oh, it's new age and it's evil." And I'm like, it's just breathing. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm a kinesiology major. We'd work with athletes. We'd have them walk through like the dive or whatever thing they're doing, but we'd have them breathe if they're anxious. That's all this is. It's not meditation. Like, this isn't prayer. It's not solitude. It's just breathing. Like, when I'm anxious, like, I'm touching my belly. Your belly should be going up and down, not with this. And so I've tried mindfulness, and I use apps like Calm and Headspace. You know, diet, like when I'm anxious. And so here's like, this is all, it's what comes first, chicken or egg.
Right. And you can't necessarily say which comes first. Correct.
Yeah. So I've struggled with sleep for 8 years. I've fragmented sleep. I'm up quite a lot. And so, you know, is that what happens and my body responds with anxiety, or does my anxiety cause sleeplessness, which both of those things have been proven to be true. Right. But I do a lot of sleep hygiene, which is an interesting term, like, you know, blackout blinds, or I make sure I'm not on technology before I go to bed within an hour, and I keep the house really cool. But like and I eat healthy. I try to have less caffeine, no aspartame. Like, aspartame has been shown to kind of exacerbate anxiety. And if you're doing well, it might not matter. Same with, like, I love iced coffee. Like, give me a morning iced coffee any day of the week. But if I'm anxious and I have an iced coffee, I can, like, for anyone who drinks coffee, like, you know, you can feel that caffeine kick into you. If I'm having a really bad anxiety day, it feels like a panic attack coming in. Whereas if I'm doing okay and I feel that coming in, it's like, I got this. I know what this is. And so some people just stop coffee, other ones don't. But for me, it's this never ending complexity of trying to be healthy physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Yeah. And it's in that I kind of look at moving forward.
Yeah. You are illustrating something I heard you say in one of your presentations, and I may not get the words right, but something like, you can still be, I'm going to use the word mentally ill or mentally challenged, or have these issues and be well or functional. Talk about those two things together. And I may not be saying it the way you said it, but talk about that.
I was at a conference just before COVID hit. I was traveling across Canada with youth workers, and it was a mental health day. And one of the leaders, her name was Iona Snare, she's up in Vancouver, talked about this idea. And as I've researched it and spent time, it's very brilliant. So there's two axes, this one and this one. So this one, high or low, is mental health. And everyone listening or watching, we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. Yeah. And so, and this to me would be things like seasonal affective disorder, even, you know, just, we're not talking mental illness, we're talking mental health. And so the World Health Organization defines that as, you know, you're fruitful with your work. Yeah. You can enjoy life. Like, I think of it as resilience. You know, those cheap plastic balls you can buy, if you push it in, it pops back out. Yep. Yep. So we have mental health, just like we have physical health, but the other one is mental illness. And these are diagnosed, right, by medical professionals, not just me, like diagnosed by a medical doctor, a psychologist, psychiatrist, anxiety, mood disorders, eating disorders. And so while I have, like, for me, I've been diagnosed with anxiety, depression, panic disorder, even PTSD. Like, I mean, the disorders can be easily labeled. Sure. But while I have those, like, I have high mental illness, I also can have high or low mental health. And I remember the first time I heard that, I'm like, oh, it doesn't make sense. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I really like that. Yeah. That no matter what illness you have, like, it's just like if someone has physical illness, if you have cancer or something you're journeying through, even in that, you have a chance to have good mental health inside that. So the nuance, I think, is really brilliant for us to think. So when on a Canadian news thing recently, it said 72% of Canadians have worse mental health during COVID. First off, it's wrong. It's 100%, and 100% of Americans
and 100% of the worldwide population. This is something 7+ billion people have experienced together.
But someone wrote me the next day and said, "Oh, did you see this article? I can't believe there's been such a growth." And they actually wrote down in schizophrenia, bipolar, and listed off other mental illnesses. And I'm like, that's not what it says. Like, that's not, the article's talking about we have poor mental health. Now, long-term poor mental health is a risk factor for mental illness. And so that's many of our concerns as parents and as leaders right now, and this COVID season looks like it's coming to an end, but what are the ramifications for students, for us, after having long-term unwellness, sort of?
Right.
Yeah.
The mental health and mental illness, the medical doctor part of me can think of physical analogies, and maybe this will help someone who's listening. I can be overweight and sedentary and eat unhealthfully, so I am very unphysically healthy, and that predisposes me to diabetes. I can also have a diagnosis of diabetes and be physically healthy, be active, eating well, and keeping my body optimal. And both of those things can be present at the same time physically. And you've given the mental analogy. I think that is very helpful for many who are struggling with this very real issue. One of the things that we really believe here at Dr. Kill Ministries is the integrated way in which God made us. Physical, emotional, relational, spiritual. It's not, one or the other. It's all of the above. And you have a similar perspective on mental wellness or illness or wholeness or whatever. And I think that'd be useful just to unpack for a minute how it's all of the above. I've had the chance to have 3 psychologists in my journey. And one of them once said, to facilitate healing, we have to divide up the indivisible. And it's been a line I've never forgotten. Like, I think, and I generalize, but often we want to make mental health very simple. And it's not. It's really complex. We are complex people. And so we have to look at the physical, the emotional, the relational. Like, I like body, mind, and soul. And I like what you've done. You've just broken it out even more. So if you don't assess properly, how do we give people an answer? Now, too often we give the answer. So the other day online, 2 people in one day posted, Jesus is the answer for anxiety. Now, I understand what they're saying, but it makes me feel really discouraged because I read that and I'm like, well, I still have anxiety. I guess I don't have enough Jesus in my life. I guess I haven't prayed enough or read my Bible enough. Now, that's not what they were saying, but this is where there's incredible nuance with language. We just have to be very careful with. Yeah. So I have a friend, I go to a sleep clinic and the doctor tells me you have fragmented sleep. I can't help you. He goes to a sleep clinic and the doctor says, you have the worst sleep apnea I've ever seen. And he put him on, I call them Darth Vader machines, CPAP machines, and he's better almost instantly. But if the church was just saying, you just need to read your Bible more and pray more, which are wonderful things. But if his answer was sleep apnea, we're going to miss it. Right.
And so I love the idea of looking at all the things. Now, we need to do that because there's so many risk factors coming into mental health. Mm-hmm. Like, I have this chart that I use and I just walk through everything from burnout and breakdown and predisposition and traumatic events and poor diet, lack of sleep, even overparenting.
Yes.
So I have a talk called Parenting Navigating Everything. And when we overfunction as parents, our kids underfunction. And kids head off to college so ill prepared for life and they get anxious. Now, that anxiety has to do with us not preparing our kids. Yeah. Now, often, and I put up a slide in my talk, I have all these things that are risk factors. And often in the church, we kind of narrow it down to it's either Jesus doing it to you or Satan's attacking you. And I kind of just say, well, let's get rid of that. And maybe if you put lines going across, if your issue is overparenting, maybe the solution is actually properly equipping our kids. Mm-hmm. If your issue is a lack of sleep, maybe the issue is sleeping more. Now, this is all done through our biblical worldview,
Right.
But I think sometimes the over spiritualization is what ends up hurting people, because they don't look for help and answers in go get blood work done. It might be a thyroid issue. It might be low vitamins. It might be, you maybe have something actually physically wrong with you. If you've had trauma in your life, go sit down with a registered counselor who walks through trauma. And too often, I think in counseling, we're actually talking about spiritual formation. If all the conversation's about Jesus, it's good stuff. But in this conversation, if you have anxiety, I want people to walk through, tips and tricks and thoughts and how to reframe my thinking on my day of mental health. And so I love if there's complexity coming in, there's complexity coming out. And so let's not just quickly give quick statements. I mean, that's the cliches that we say. And I mean, this from my standpoint, you've probably seen this. Anyone you speak to on mental health, almost across the board, says the church has hurt them more than it's helped them.
Which is tragic, Brett. And I want to get more to that in just a second, but that is just tragedy.
Like how? Like, we're to be the hope of the world.
Yes.
We're not to be the destruction of our culture on a conversation. Like, it's so counterintuitive of what we're supposed to be.
When you think about the way we talk about Jesus and mental health, I would like to go there for a minute. And there is some nuance here, because you and I both believe that both things are true, that the way the church has applied that has caused a lot of harm. And it's a vicious cycle. You're anxious, you're told, well, you got to believe and pray more. And so you try and believe and pray more, and that makes you more anxious. And it truly is a vicious cycle. I've experienced that in my past as well. And we also believe that Jesus truly is the hope of the world. And there is no area of life that Jesus does not care about and does not touch. So what does that look like for followers of Jesus?
Again, I use the term tension. Rick Warren often uses that term, and I really like it. It's an and conversation and not an or.
Yeah.
Like, the answers for people will probably be exercise, sleep clinic, might be medications, might be trauma counseling, and Jesus. Now, I often say, your issue might be physical, it might be emotional, but I pause before I say spiritual, because it's incredibly uncommon that the entire answer to mental illness is in our faith. It's very uncommon. Yeah. Not to say we don't read books on spiritual warfare. I think you have one, and Neil Anderson's The Bomb. I said Neil Armstrong the other week in a date. Very different person, Neil Armstrong. But that's an and, we incorporate that. But usually the answer is not that. So do we pray for healing? For sure we do. But what do you do when the answer and there isn't healing? And the truth is, there are millions of us who pray for healing from cancer and other things. Again, we live in the now and the not yet. Genesis 3 applies. We live in a broken world, right? And and we have this. And so I always just say, in the Bible, it talks about how you will suffer. But God says very clearly, I'll be with you in that suffering. Mm-hmm. And so it's not a guarantee of you'll be better, but we know that we're not alone. And that's why I love, from a pastoral standpoint, talking to your people that you're not alone in these conversations is really, really important. God is with us in this. And this is where too, we need to make sure we're not just sometimes I speak and someone says afterwards, oh, can we have a healing prayer service after? And I'm like, we can. But by doing that, you're really saying that the answer is just found in this. Are you also going to have a nutrition service after? Are you also because there's so much in this. Yeah. If we as Christians only offer the answer in a spiritual realm, we're negating everything to a spiritual realm. And it's really blaming people. If the answer is, and this happens, I had friends, a few times I've heard this, people's parents have died of cancer, and the church has said, well, you didn't read your Bible and pray enough. Yeah. And it's how, if everyone in the Bible lived to incredible old age, which many did, but John the Baptist was beheaded. That's right. Jesus was murdered. Most of the disciples, other than one, if I'm correct, were murdered and martyred. Even Job, Job came back, but Job's family died.
That's right.
And we forget in the Bible that it's not just a clear-cut conversation. So this is why I think it's so important that we address, like I do a new thing talking about how do we make our churches safe spaces for people with mental health. Mm-hmm. I don't really like that term safe space. It kind of comes, but it's the reality. Like if by what we say and we do, we hurt people, it's not okay. So we address it from the pulpit. I even encourage like musical worship leaders to not say everyone rise. Such a simple thing. But for me, if I have to stand up, I now hold on to the pew for dear life because I standing for me makes me dizzy.
And it's not worship for you.
No. So, and it's not like you have to stand to worship. And what about a mother who's been breastfeeding throughout the night? What about someone who's just exhausted and they're in church? And so it's looking at how do we connect with everyone? And I think these are just ways, there's just things we need to make sure we're doing to connect with everyone, because the goal is moving towards hope and healing, not just what I think moving towards hope and healing is, because each person is so different and so unique.
Yeah. And I believe there's scripture that backs that up. You've alluded to many of them. It makes me remember the end of Hebrews 11. After all these faith heroes, the writer says, time would fail to tell of all these others. You know, some women received their dead back to life and men put armies to flight, and some went around in sheepskins desolate and were killed with the sword. Same faith. It wasn't that the people who were victorious had faith and the others didn't. Same faith. And we forget the already not yet when we're sometimes in the middle of these very real struggles.
I call this the shiny happy people syndrome. Remember the band REM from the 1990s? They had a song called Shiny Happy People. And I think sometimes, and this isn't a diagnosed syndrome, it's just what I call it, but it's like we in the church. So it's like we know Jesus, so everything's great. So in it, if I'm struggling with mental health, I have to put on a smile and say everything's great, but maybe it's not. And so we need to really, this is where we need rich friendships. Like if I say to you, hey, how are you doing? People go, good. But if I say, how are you really doing? And someone goes, oh, it's been a really rough week. Like we need to share and we need to, really get to know and understand where people are so we can meet them where they're at. And if people who don't know Jesus come to our churches and we're all smiling like everything's perfect, they'll say, well, this isn't I don't understand that. I'm really broken. We can love Jesus and still be broken.
These aren't my people, if that's all they see. Yeah. And I love how you referenced that Jesus came to be with us, and we need to be with others. It wasn't that Jesus came here fixing everybody. Yes, he fixes everybody, but that wasn't the way he connected with people. He was with them, and we need to be with people. For people, Brett, who may be right in the middle of that kind of a struggle. Maybe it's anxiety similar to what you continue to walk through, or some other, mental illness, and they are really, really wrestling with this. Some first steps, and I know you talk about that. What are some of those helpful first things that somebody maybe can grab onto that if they're right in the middle of a mental health mess?
One of my favorite books I read last year was a book on habits called Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Great one. I love that book.
New York's bestseller. And another one by BJ Fogg called Tiny Habits. Very similar ideas. And so I would encourage people to be 5% better in any of the things I'll talk about in the next few minutes here.
Great.
And someone why 5%, Brett? Because it's an absolute joke. You can all be 5% better.
And and thank you for making that clear. We're not talking about you've got to get to 90%. A minuscule change will be something, it will be worth it. So go for it.
So I like the simplicity of body, mind, and soul. Every church I've ever attended, meeting the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of people. So in the physical realm, be 5% better in exercise, be 5% better in your diet, be 5% better with sleep. Take those simplistic things. Now, if you struggle with mental health, exercise is a non-negotiable, and it's different for everyone. Some people will say, well, I could barely get around the block. And I'd say, well, get to the mailbox and back. If you have one of those mailboxes at the end of the street, but do something, eat better. It might mean you just add this to your life as opposed to a Coke or Pepsi. 5%. While you're doing that, look at the idea of getting emotionally healthy, whether it's seeing a counselor once a month, once every 2 months, like, or just reading on this conversation, listening to podcasts and being on YouTube for conversations like this, gain a better understanding, 5%. And while we're doing that, again, the foundation is our faith. Read your Bible 5% more. Yeah. And when I say that again, I'm not saying reading your Bible is going to fix your mental health, right. But it's one of those things that's foundational for us to continue to grow in all of those areas and just know that we're not alone. And so I also think I'm a big fan and I don't know if the term, like in Canada, we're seeing more and more, it's called functional and integrative medicine. And what I love is, as opposed to being a medical doctor or a naturopathic doctor, it's a clinic which has both of them.
Yeah.
And osteopaths, massage therapists, physiotherapists, counselors. It's looking at us as the whole.
Yes.
And I really love that. And so it's the integration of all of those things that I think helps us to move forward. And I will say, to steal the Home Depot slogan, you can do it, we can help.
Love it. Love it. Yes.
Like, for anyone listening, don't do this on your own. I understand the anxiety, the panic, the depression. I understand we feel lost. As you look at moving forward, find some people to journey with, friends, family. Like, this is what the church should be as we do this together. Find podcasts, other people that can help you along this, but don't do it on your own.
Yeah. Last question. Sometimes people in leadership, especially Christian leadership, even if they say, oh, this message is great for them, it doesn't apply to me. I've got to look good. I've got to be the shiny, happy people because I'm in front. Just a minute or two to squash that and speak to those who may be in some measure of leadership, even if it's comparatively minor, so to speak.
I think there's a vulnerability in just being real, whether you're a pastor, I run a not-for-profit and other things, but there's a vulnerability in just sharing, like, as leaders, teaching people that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And there's also there's almost a different aspect of leadership. There's an isolation that we have, greater loneliness we have as we all reach certain levels of leadership in our areas. And I find there's incredible burnout and breakdown.
Yeah.
I just started a master's degree in counseling psychology so that I can do psychotherapy. I want to add that to what I do. But what I really want to specialize in is burnout and breakdown, especially from my peers in leadership. And so there's a vulnerability as a pastor in sharing that you're a real person and everything is not perfect. And then people sit under you and go, okay, we can do this. It's also just, there's something about almost by saying those things that you let everyone in the audience know that this is a safe space.
Yes.
I was at a church and the music was really going to be really loud. You could tell, right? There was smoke coming out and the lasers kind of were about to begin. And the pastor said, before we do musical worship, I just want to let you know, if any of you have anxiety struggles, hearing whatever, and this is going to bother you, we have couches out back and plasma screen TV and the music's less. Please go there. We love you. And then he said the thing that almost made me cry. He said, and when it's all done, I start preaching right away. But he said, you do not disturb me when you come back in. And I remember going, I could be here. Like, it's a vulnerability sharing your own stuff, but also really gaining the empathy and understanding of the people who are under you. And so there's this, again, it's a tension of that. But I think that shows incredible leadership to actually address those things from the front. And just think of what an exciting church to be in, where they actually are saying, we know you struggle, but we love you. And let's walk through some of these things together.
Yeah. Thank you for being one of those people who is doing that and helping to show others how to do that. Brett, invite people to some of your resources. I know you talk about mental health and you mentioned parenting, and that's not all you talk about. You talk about men, and just invite people to your stuff.
Sure. My website's just my name, brettullman.com. I guess you'll put that in the show notes for this as well. I will.
Absolutely.
So my website, I always say I'm a blogger, but I'm not. I'm a curator. I read extensively blogs, other things, and then I take the best stuff. So the other week I heard I read an article talking about how mental health during COVID, they used the term languishing. And I'm like, oh, that's a really great word. So I send that off.
Yeah.
But 1,100 things all categorized on my site. And up the top is all of my social media. And I encourage, after watching the Social Dilemma on Netflix, I've been encouraging people, when you hear a speaker or an author or someone, the moment you and I connected, I go and I like you on YouTube and on Facebook and all these different things.
Yep.
Because what I want is, like, when we finish recording this and I take a break and go on social media, I don't just want dinner and dogs. I have an English bulldog. I like certain dogs, but I want rich content from faith leaders, thought leaders, pastors, like all kinds of people on the content that I'm going through in life. So all my socials at the top, and my YouTube channel has about 200 videos. And I have written 5 books. 2 are on mental health. One is called Your Story. It's actually a book I wrote with a psychologist and another pastor. And it's not the body, mind, and soul. It's just eating disorders, like depression, what these things are. And I wrote a book called Reset, which is a free book on my website. I think it's $1 on Amazon, but it's my breakdown put in book form.
Great.
Someone just said, I've never heard a perspective of that. And so I wrote my journey. You might know the name Carey Nieuwhof. Carey wrote his journey, and some friends and family wrote theirs. And most recently, last summer, and I don't have it with me, I usually would show it, I brought out a handbook. It's a 226,000 word handbook for parents called Parenting, Navigating Everything.
Everything. Wow. Yeah.
6 chapters literally on parenting, communication, discipline, time, parenting styles. But the last 10 chapters are written for anyone with parenting tips. So mental health by far is the biggest chapter with that.
Sure.
And then it's like pornography, sexuality, dating, media, family discipleship, and all those things. But it is, the goal is almost like the old choose your own adventure books from the days gone by, right? Like, if your kid's struggling with mental health, or you are, go to mental health.
Yeah.
But you can find that on Amazon or anywhere else. And I've actually just recently put that on Right Now Media as a video series with a study guide where you can walk through that conversation with other parents from your church or your community.
Well, congratulations on that, on Right Now Media. Brett, again, it's been such a pleasure. And yes, we will have those links below this video and in the show notes for the audio podcast. It's just great to connect with you. And thank you for sharing both your story, your perspective, and continuing to walk this journey. And God bless you as you continue in your leadership and all that God is doing with and through you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here for this conversation today.
I hope you now can understand how you can have mental health even if you are walking through a mental illness. The already and the not yet. Brett and I alluded to that briefly, but remember, the kingdom of God is here now in reality, but not yet in fullness. This is not as good as it gets. We embrace every bit of the transformation Jesus makes available through every means available. And we also look forward to the time when our struggles will be over and God will make everything right in eternity. Hold on to that. A super important perspective that in the middle of our mess, you don't lose sight of. Check the links in the show notes, brettullman.com. Check out his videos, his books on parenting and other issues. You'll find them just uplifting and helpful. All those links will be in the show notes with this episode. I want to thank you for being part of our podcast family, and want to invite you to leave a comment or a question on our website, drcarolministries.com, the contact page there. I read those personally, and it just means so much when I hear from you. It also means a lot when you share this podcast. If you rate it on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts, if you leave a comment or whatever, that helps more people find it, and we so appreciate that. I pray that as you walk through today, tomorrow, and the next day, that you continue to do that 5% better, as Brett talked about, in your physical health, in your emotional health, and in your walk with God. And He will walk with you. You will be in my prayers. And until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.